Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson. I'd like to welcome you to another topic that, I've been thinking about things to talk about the last couple of days based on what's going on in our society today with the current occupant of the Oval Office and the last couple of years of things that seem to have taken us back a few steps when it comes to race relations here in America. For those of you who are new to the show, the Umoja Circle is a African-centered talk show where we correct errors where errors are found, and we introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to people of African descent. And some of the topics that I try to bring to the forefront is topics that deal with these day-to-day things that are important to us, mostly people of African descent, but basically all Americans of different cultures can dialogue with this. And in the form of dialogue, we believe here at the Umoja Circle that only through dialogue can there also be a shift in consciousness. And once there's a shift in consciousness, there's a shift in the world, because the world takes place within our minds. Like I said, for those of you who are new to the show, I have been doing this show since 1995. So in the last, I think, 24 years that I've been doing this show, many of the topics that I started out talking about back then in 1995 were basically topics that when I was younger, I dealt with. Since I'm a baby boomer, I heard as a young kid during the Black Power movement and growing up in Brooklyn, New York, that I heard back in the late 60s. Same topics that I heard in the 70s as I gotten older. I've always been active in community activities. And I've been hearing from the perspective of people of African descent the same complaints when it comes to the disparities of how we're treated by police, how we're dealing with issues of race and how we're treated, and the disparities of how wealth and income disparities, housing disparities. This topic has been going on within my lifetime for my lifetime. And basically, as I have been listening, like I said earlier, listening to the topics that are being incorporated in the news. A couple of years ago was Colin Kaepernick and his protest of police brutality and the inconsistencies and the disparities between young black men and police in this country. And we had issues with some of the statues, Confederate statues, in places like Charlottesville, Virginia, outside the University of Virginia. And all these different and immigration disparities with DACA, some of our Latino brothers and sisters, the Mexican brothers and sisters, the inconsistencies that are being done that way. So the topic of race in America is still part of the American dialogue. And before the show, I was trying to think of how to approach this in a different way than I've already approached it many different times. I have no problem of bringing up these topics in various different ways, because the dialogue must be addressed, must be talked about. And before I go any further with this, I got a statement I'd like to put up there of what I'm talking about, or what I'll be talking about. And that statement said, today, the dominant legacy of African American life in this country, regardless of what the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment of the Constitution may say, is still a sense of lack of protection under the law as citizens of the United States of America. It's a way of thinking that most white Americans, regardless of their social status, finds hard to understand, that there is and always have been a two-tier system of citizenship in America, therefore two Americans, still separate and unequal. And how is that kind of divide in the way we view how we are as people of African descent, and by the 13th Amendment free, by the 14th Amendment citizens, by the 15th Amendment have our suffrage in which we can vote for who we want into office, but yet we still have these issues as of today. In the 2018 election, there were discrepancies, especially in places like Georgia, Florida, where there were certain questions in how the vote was done. I think it was in 2013 when part of the Voting Rights Act, the most important part of the Voting Rights Act, which was a remnant of what happened going back through segregation after the Civil War, which even though we had the 15th Amendment, blacks were found to have difficulties to express their aspect of citizenship and vote. And there was this Voting Rights Act of 1965 had this part of it in which those who abuse our rights as black people, mostly the Confederate states, in the South, places like Georgia and places like Florida, would have to, if they're going to make any changes to the voting rule, have to pass through, I think, the federal government and show them what the changes are and how it would affect. But the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court said that racism no longer exists in his mind, and that part of the Voting Rights Act, which gutted it, I think Article 4. Section 4 of the 4 or 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which requires the federal government to overlook any changes that were made by a state, especially a state that was once part of the Confederacy, that once showed problems in its way it treated people of African descent. Now, why is that? Why are we still dealing with issues that divide us as a country? There's still a division between when it comes to race and race relationship here in America, and that's what I was trying to grapple with in my own mind. And there's a issue that I used to talk about many years ago, what we call cognitive dissonance. When you have this divide, there is a way that people, even individuals, deal with it. We tend to ignore things that are bad in our history, in our life, right? And we try to focus on the good stuff. We all do it. I've done it. Many of you out there might have done it as individuals in things that you don't want to deal with that you did wrong in your past. And I think, personally, I think collectively, America, as a collective consciousness, have that same issue, especially white America, because of the things that they've done to Native Americans for hundreds of years, people of African descent for hundreds of years, and still, in some aspect, doing that for hundreds of years, where you only focus on the good. America the Great, the land of the free, the home of the brave. The 4th of July, every 4th of July, we send up rockets and celebrate something that happened over 200 years ago. But that in the same breath, we always, white Americans have the tendency of telling people, people of African descent, why do we still focus on slavery? Why do we still focus on those negative things that America did to us? It's like me talking to a young lady who, in her 40s or 50s, who had been raped when she was 7, 8, 12, a teenager, that's still struggling with that negative history, and I should come here and tell her, as a man, that she should forget about that. It's happened in the past. That, she would look at me crazy, and that should be how it should be looked at. But yet we people of African descent are told to, why y'all bring up that black stuff, or that old stuff that happened in the past? You know, have we gotten together in the last 50 or 60 years in 1964 and the Civil Rights Act? But you got to think about this. Like I said, individuals tend to do that. We kind of disregard the negative in our past and try to focus on the positive things. We all do that. But if those negative things are not addressed and are ignored, you will not heal. Now, as individuals, the trauma or the problem that comes from that unresolved history, that negative history that causes disparity in the way you function within your household might not go past the four walls of your house, but it will affect the people in it. It will come up in some form, say in the way you might take up drinking, or you might not, you can't sleep, or there's anxiety in your life. You don't know, and you have to go to somebody and talk about it. You have to dialogue with a counselor or a psychiatrist or psychologist as individuals to deal with that thing you've been unconsciously ignoring. But that's as an individual we do that. And you can see some of the trauma and the unhealed and undealt with issues that could arise when an individual ignore those things that they might have done wrong and are not willing to face yet, or things that were done to them that they're still trying to deal and find closure in. And as long as America do that collectively, and that's what came to me, that even though these problems when it comes to race still have not fully been addressed, only thing that we want to focus on when the topic of race come into discussion, we want to get past it as quick as we can. We just scratch the surface, have a few town meetings and dialogue and talk about it for a couple of weeks, then we go back to the next big thing, ignoring that trauma, that unhealed wound. And race and the problems of race will not be dealt with even in the 21st century, where we've made some progress, but we're still ignoring the selective memories that we have as a country. We only selectively want to focus on the good things, either good things that happened or things that we had to deal with as victims. You know, like the attack historically on America at Pearl Harbor, you know, would justify our outrage and the things that we did and heroic stuff. Black people are told, why are y'all bringing up that old stuff? But I always say to white Americans who tell me that, why did y'all talk about old stuff? Why you talk about 1776, which is 200 and something, 40-something years ago, that old stuff? Because your selective memory, or I call it the selective myth, is that you know, you focus on only the positive and you ignore that. And the fact that enslavement and what this country did to people of African descent, that they have to, that are still traumatized by it because of the way these systems were formed. Under those systems of segregation, under the systems of enslavement, you create a trauma that goes from generation to generation to generation. I've said it in the past, and this is a quote that I always like to use, again, from a black psychiatrist called his name is Dr. Wade Nobles. And he always says that the actions of a generation becomes the experience of that generation. And how they deal with that experience and the kind of actions that they took dealing with that experience, like slavery, like Jim Crow segregation, becomes the history of the next generation. And that history that is passed on generation to generation becomes a culture of actions of a people, okay? And if we don't address some of those traumas, even if it's 100, 200, 300 years ago, or the trauma of a woman in her 50s and it happened decades ago, that trauma goes on. And the result of that trauma is passed on to her child or how she deals with her husband and all the other relationships that she has. So trauma is passed on. There's another black psychiatrist that I like to quote, Dr. Naeem Akbar, who said that we all carry the minds of those who come before us. So one of the things that you must understand about disparities is that if you're looking at a disparity, say the problems that people of African descent is complaining about the wealth gap between the average black family and the average white family. There's an income gap based on that. If you're trying to deal with the disparities of how black men and women are treated when they enter the criminal justice system, or the poor, how it's treated, and you notice this disparity in the present moment, and you're trying to understand that, it'll be very difficult unless you understand how it came to that point. What was the precedence that was set in the past that brought you to the point that created this disparity? If you don't understand the precedence, you'll never understand the present moment. And that's part of what I want to talk about. There is a reason for these disparities. And if people are ignoring the negative things when we bring these problems up, and only want to focus on the positive stuff or the cultural myth that benefits them, the wounds of that divide will not, that cause those divides, by this racial divide, is never going to be healed in this country. We have to face that truth. There's another statement I want to put up there so that you could see. You see, whenever you look out and see disparities in our society, whether they are economic disparities, educational disparities, wealth and housing disparities, or disparities in the criminal justice system, there is no accident. And that's what I was trying to say earlier, only precedent. In other words, there's no accident in shaping a society, only events that preceded it. And that's whatever you witness it with your own eyes today, as that statement says, there is no accident of how that came into being. And until you understand that everything that we see in a system was created deliberately. Everything that's political, a political system, an economic system, there were men who created that. But who did it benefit? And if the people that it benefited did it at the expense of another group, we must deal with that issue. We must deal with that truth. If we ignore that and don't want to dialogue about that, then there will be problems that will never get solved. You'll never heal. We'll never collectively heal as a country. That's what we're having right now. For example, we got that individual we have a politician today that's wearing create this red hat that said, "Make America Great Again," okay? We're talking about whose past, whose America? And how is that, if we don't dialogue in that truth, people that look like me, or people that look like that have Mexican ancestry or other parts of Latin American ancestry, are going to have, and our realities are ignored. Are selectively ignored. There will be frustrations. Protests, or sometimes even riots, is the language of the unheard. We got to understand that truth. It is the language of the unheard. And that is something that we need to address. We'll never heal in America as long as we selectively only focus on the good things that happen. And for those who are not part of the group or the dominant group, are just by the nature of following their reality will get ignored. And they will constantly bring up that. If there's something that bothers me and I'm forced to keep it inside of me in say an individual relationship type of reality, then there will be problems. It will be obvious. Either I'm going to lash out eventually, or I will withdraw so much that you'll notice this depressive states where we have a high suicide rate, especially in the Black community, in the Latino community, in other poor or disenfranchised community, Native American community. They are part of this fabric called America. But if we only hear the perspective of one group in this country, then the racial divide that tears at the fabric of the society that we're still dealing with in the 21st century is going to constantly rear its ugly head, and people going to constantly say, why? Why do we deal with this? If you don't understand the precedents, if you don't understand and listen to and dialogue with people of African descent type reality that is different than a white American's reality. There's a two-tier system. There's always been two Americas. That's a hard thing to say because it goes against what people are told. It goes against what we are constantly being conditioned to believe from the time we enter the educational system. we're unconscious, this unconscious bias that is part of the American landscape that we have to deal with. This unconscious bias that comes from that discrepancy, that cognitive dissonance, where you have a true opposing truth that constantly crash into us. The truth of the experience of people of African descent, of Native people, of brown people, of the history of what happened to hundreds of thousands of Japanese at the beginning of World War II when they were put into internment camp. That does not fit the narrative that the majority population wants to continually to believe, that there is this one thing called America, and somehow all these people who are constantly complaining that America does not work for them, and those who experience the privilege of being part of the dominant group, even if you are at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder of that group. I'm sure at the bus stop, the next bus stop that Rosa Parks was on on that bus, if there was a poor white farmer who didn't have only enough for the bus fare, she would still have to get up and go to the back of the bus if he was white. See, two different realities, okay? Regardless of what her socioeconomic level was, based on that history of racism that existed, in that type of racism that existed during segregation, her reality was that she was told that she was subservient even to that dirt poor farmer who might have gotten on the bus and forced her to go to the back of the bus. And if she could complain, she was going to jail, which she did in our historical reality. And when you have to deal with that type of trauma, okay, again, the collective memory of America, which tends to always ignore collectively the negative aspect of this history in America, and only tried to focus on the positive aspect of America, which fit their history, ignoring our trauma, race in America, and the racial divide would not be dealt with. That's what we have to focus on. This is what I was thinking about. You know, how do I address this issue? And it dawned on me, you know, the trauma of Black people, the trauma of Native people, the trauma of marginalized people in America is ignored, selectively ignored by the dominant groups want to focus on what Malcolm called the established order logic. I mean, the logic of the dominant group. You know, I didn't create this history, you know, and I'm using terms that I know is uncomfortable. Again, I'm hitting areas that cognitive dissonance that a lot of people, white America, that's the white privilege. You have the privilege of being able to ignore what these other marginalized group have. That's what white privilege means. Not only that you might have some kind of economic advantage or educational advantage or wealth advantage, yeah, that's part of white privilege, but you also have the advantage of being able to ignore the others and create your own logic, your own history that makes you feel good about who you are as an American. And when you hear people that look like me complaining, or look like Colin Kaepernick complaining, or the Me Too movement of women who are complaining, you know, that there are still discrepancies in this country for that particular interest group, or the LGBTQ community complaining, there's still discrepancies, and you are part of the dominant group, and you only want to deal with the positive thing that makes you feel good, we're gonna have problems like we have going on at this very moment, every minute of this day, constantly being put out there in the news. Yeah. So I'm gonna continue this topic on the next show, but I wanted to start off and share with you what I was feeling, you know, as I looked. I know many of you are tired of hearing what you hear in the news, especially on the topic of race, especially dealing in the political negativity and the world negativity and the negativity about coming together. But if you don't face the truth, just like an individual who doesn't face the truth of some of the things that he did that unconsciously is still bothering him and he's still responding to on the unconscious level, and he can't until he brings it to the forefront and realize what he or she might have done in the past that is creating certain behaviors in him now, America, we're not going to heal. That's what this is about. If you truly want to heal, Black America, white America, you got to face the reality of the history that really doesn't fit the reality that you've been conditioned to believe in, that this has always been some place of wonderment, so we could go back to that time and make it great again. But until next time, I must go. Peace, Hotep, bye-bye.